Welcome to Clink Evangelical Church's Bible Study, third one for the month of March. I want us to continue to thinking of these characters from the Bible who we don't necessarily know a lot about. And tonight we're thinking about Caleb from Numbers chapter 13 and 14. I've got it under the title, tonight our thoughts: we can't all be Joshua's, but we can all be Caleb's. And that was what some commentators said. We can't all be Joshua's, but we can all be Caleb's. So let's read Numbers chapter 13. The Lord said to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am given to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe send one of its leaders." So at the Lord's command, Moses sent them from the desert of Paran. All of them were leaders of the Israelites, and these are their names. Then we go through a list of names. I'm not going to read them all tonight, but we'll pick out verse 6 from the tribe of Judah, Caleb, son of Jephunneh. And also we see in verse 8 from the tribe of Ephraim, Hosea, son of Nun. These are the names of the men, verse 16, Moses sent to explore the land. And Moses gave Hosea, son of Nun, the name Joshua. When Moses sent them to explore Canaan, he said, "Go up through the Negev and on into the hill country. See what the land is like, and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or are they fortified? How is the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are there trees in it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land." It was the season for the first ripe grapes. So they went up and they explored the land from the deserts of Zin as far as Rebo towards Hebo-Hamath. They went on up through the Negev and came to Hebron, where the descendants of Anak lived. Hebron had been built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. When they reached the valley of Eshcol, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. 2 of them carried it on a pole between them, along with some pomegranates and figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because the cluster of grapes the Israelites cut off there. At the end of 40 days they returned from exploring the land. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly, and they showed them the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account: "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there, they are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev, the Hittites, Jebusites and Amorites live in the hill country, the Canaanites live near the sea along the Jordan." Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we certainly can do it." But the men who had gone up with him said, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report. They said, "The land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there, they are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak came from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." Chapter 14. That night all the members of the community raised their voices and wept aloud. All the Israelites grumbled against Moses and Aaron, and the whole assembly said to them, "If only we had died in Egypt or in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us to this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt?" And they said to each other, "We should choose a leader and go back to Egypt." Then Moses and Aaron fell face down in front of the whole Israelite assembly gathered there. Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes. And they said to the entire Israelite assembly, "The land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone. The Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them." But the whole assembly talked about stoning them. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of the meeting of all the Israelites. The Lord said to Moses, "How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me, in spite of all the signs I have performed among them? I will strike them down with a plague and destroy them, but I will make you into a greater nation and stronger than they." Moses said to the Lord, "Then the Egyptians will hear about it. By your power you brought these people up from among them, and they will tell the inhabitants of this land about it. They have already heard about you, Lord, that you are with these people, and that you, Lord, have been seen face to face, that your cloud stays over them, and that you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. If you put all these people to death, leaving none alive, the nations who have heard this report about you will say, 'The Lord was not able to bring these people into the land he promised them on oath, so he slaughtered them in the wilderness.' Now may the Lord's strength be displayed, just as you have declared. The Lord is slow to anger, abounding in love, and forgiving sin and rebellion. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children for the sin of their parents to the third and fourth generation. In accordance with your great love, forgive the sin of these people, just as you have pardoned them from the time they left Egypt until now." The Lord replied, "I have forgiven them as you have asked. Nevertheless, as surely as I live, and as surely as the glory of the Lord fills the whole earth, not one of those who saw my glory and the signs I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, but who disobeyed me and tested me 10 times, not one of them will see the land I promised on oath to their ancestors. No one who has treated me with contempt will ever see it. But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. Since the Amalekites and the Canaanites are living in the valleys, turn back tomorrow and set out towards the desert along the route of the Red Sea." The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "How long will this wicked community grumble against me? I have heard the complaints of these grumbling Israelites. So tell them, as surely as I live, declares the Lord, I will do to you the very thing I heard you say. In this wilderness your bodies will fall. Every one of you 20 years old or more, who was counted in the census and who has grumbled against me. Not one of you will enter the land I swore with uplifted hands to make your home, except Caleb and Joshua. As for your children that you said would be taken as plunder, I will bring them in to enjoy the land you have rejected. But as for you, your bodies will fall in the wilderness. Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness, until the last of your bodies lies in the wilderness. For 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land. You will suffer for your sins and know what it is like to have me against you. I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will surely do these things to this whole wicked community which has banded together against me. They will meet their end in this wilderness. Here they will die. So the men Moses had sent to explore the land, who returned and made the whole community grumble against him by spreading a bad report about it. These men who were responsible for spreading a bad report about the land were struck down and died of a plague before the Lord. Of the men who went to explore the land, only Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh survived. When I've been preaching on a Sunday, we've been looking at the life of Joshua from the book bearing his name. We have seen him succeed Moses as leader of the children of Israel. We have seen him so far lead the people across the Jordan River. We've seen him lead the people against Jericho. We've seen him lead the people to deal with the sin in the camp. He is what we would say is a man who's a born leader. In our Bible studies for March, we've been thinking of those used by God who we wouldn't ourselves have chosen. We have considered the left-handed Ehud. Being left-handed in those days would have been thought of as a disability, as a disadvantage, even looked down upon. We considered Deborah, very much in those days, a leading lady in a man's world. We considered last time the boy King Josiah, so young but so ready to bring God's word to the people, to obey it, to save his generation from God's judgment. Tonight we're considering Caleb. He wasn't God's first choice for a leader. Joshua was. How does Caleb react? Why does God say so much about him in our reading? Why does God say, particularly in chapter 14, verse 24, about Caleb, he was a man who had a different spirit? We can learn so much from him. So let's look into these two chapters of this story in the life of Caleb. First thing we see, the spies are sent out. Having escaped slavery in Egypt under the leadership of Moses, the Israelites eventually arrived at Kadesh Barnea, an oasis not far from the south border of Canaan. While they were there, God says to Moses, "Send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites." Chapter 13, verse 2. This team of spies was to be made up of one representative from each of the 12 tribes. From the tribe of Judah, Moses chose Caleb. From the tribe of Ephraim, he selected Hosea, to who he gave the name Joshua. Verse 16. This same Joshua would become Moses' assistant, would become commander of the army and the eventual leader, who we have been considering on some Sundays. Before sending them out to survey the land, Moses gave them a detailed briefing of what to look for. See what kind of land it is, whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they walled or fortified? How is the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are there trees on it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land, verses 18 to 20. So making sure they didn't get caught, the spies carried out a complete exploration of the land as instructed. It takes them nearly 6 weeks, 40 days, to complete their investigation. God had told the Israelites that the land he had for them would be rich and fertile, a land flowing with milk and honey. And would the report the spies bring back, would this back this up? You find the people are gathered together, anxious to hear the reports, presumably with the greatest of excitement. The spies give a glowing report about the land. They show the wonderful fruit, bunch of grapes that take 2 men to carry, just one bunch. However, the spies reckon on a problem. There is something in the way. They have a definite but in verse 28. And when the people heard that but, I guess their hearts sank. The excitement gave way to fear. The chatter stopped. The spies went on to explain how there were 2 aspects to the problem. The people who live there, they are powerful. The cities are heavy fortified, verse 28. If they entered the land, they would have to deal with the Amalekites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites and the Canaanites. And if that wasn't daunting enough, there was also descendants of Anak, giants, rumoured to be from the Nephilim, against who no one could stand. As for the cities, they had walls up to 25 feet high and 20 feet thick. And not surprisingly, chaos broke out among the people of Israel. But there was another voice, from a man with a different spirit. One voice saying something oh so completely different. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." Verse 30. Supported by Joshua, Caleb had the amazing courage and bravery to stand up against the majority of the spies and voice his opinion to what was now an unreceptive crowd. It's always hard to make a stand, to take a stand against the majority opinion. As Christians living in an increasingly godless and secular society, and we have seen just how godless and secular that is, with some of those questions we had to answer in the 2021 census last Sunday, where laws are being proposed and made almost daily which undermine what we believe. It is tough to speak out against the increasing tide of the prevailing opinion. Are we prepared to stand up? Are we prepared to speak up? Are we prepared to be counted on those issues which will and already have affected our nation? The other spies turned on Caleb and Joshua. They were shouting even louder, "We can't attack these people. They are stronger than we are," verse 31. But now I would guess the crowd were probably joining in, shouting their opinions. The spies continued to undermine the positive message Caleb had given, persisting with perhaps exaggerated reports about the land and its inhabitants. The land we explored, they ate those who were living in it. All the people were of a great size. We looked like grasshoppers to them, verses 32, 33. These 12 men, they were in the same place, at the same time. They saw the same situation. So how did they come to such opposite conclusions? The reason is that while 10 spies were walking by sight, Caleb and Joshua were walking by faith. The 10 men kept saying, "We saw," verse 28, verse 32, verse 33, with the result that their report was full of unbelief. "We can't, they are stronger," verse 31. Caleb and Joshua, however, walked by faith, saw by faith, acted by faith, and their report is full of faith and belief. We can certainly do it. We will swallow them up. Do not be afraid, verse 30 in chapter 14, verse 9. They were not put off by anything that lay in their path. They were looking at God, not at the problem. Their boldness and confidence were based on what they believed God could do, not on what they believed the Israelites could do. Had we been one of those spies, how would have our report sounded? Would they have been full of unbelief based on what we could see, or full of faith based on our belief in God, no matter what we saw? Paul in the New Testament encourages us to live by faith, not by sight. Not to see situations with our natural eyes, but with spiritual vision. And I pray that God will help each one of us to attain this faith in our walk with Him. The meeting went on all night. There was lots of shouting, moaning, grumbling, weeping. Moses and Aaron came in for lots of criticism, as was usual. The people returned to that awful familiar theme: if only we had died in Egypt or in the desert. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land only to let us fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? We should choose a new leader and go back to Egypt. Chapter 14, verses 2 to 4. The negative, faithless talk of the 10 spies had clearly got to the whole camp. The emotions of the people were to the point where everything was out of perspective. All the things they feared most had come to the surface, and the only thing they could think of doing was to run back to what they thought as safety in Egypt as quickly as possible. What had happened to their faith? What had happened to their trust in God? God, who had brought them out of slavery, who had enabled them to cross through the Red Sea, who had wonderfully provided food and water for them in the desert, who protected them by being in their presence in the pillars of cloud and fire. Did they really think God would expect them to take over the conquest of the land of Canaan all on their own without any help from Him? Here they were on the point of achieving the goal that God had promised them, and they blew it. In among the despair, fear had replaced faith, terror had replaced trust, unbelief took over belief. Do we fall into that sometimes in our Christian lives? Is it not true, while we trust God in the small things, we often lose faith when major matters come up? When this happens, it is good to remember all the things that God has already done, to remind ourselves nothing is impossible for God. God is always faithful to His promises, and He will enable us to achieve the goal which He has set us. At this point, Caleb and Joshua intervened. They tore their clothes in the front of everyone, a symbol of great distress at what was going on. They got the crowd's attention. Probably it was Caleb who then spoke up, saying what they were both thinking. Forcefully and courageously he made the following points. The land was exceedingly good, that God would lead them into that land and give it to them, provided they did not rebel against him. And there was no need to fear the people of the land, because we will swallow them up. The inhabitants of the land were defenceless against them. Their protection is gone. The Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. Verses 7, 8 and 9. But the gathered people did not share his faith-filled confidence in God. The people were so filled with anger as Caleb and Joshua continued to plead with them that they were moved to stone them to death there and then. It's so easy to criticise people being influenced by the majority. But how often do we come to decisions in the same way? Are we not swayed by public opinion, by expert opinion, by friends' opinion, rather than making our own judgments? How often is our first question, what is God saying, rather than what is everyone else saying? But verse 10, the glory of God appeared to the whole assembly. Moses pleaded with God not to destroy the people, but to forgive their sin. In another act of mercy, God spared the Israelites, but they had to pay the price for treating God with so much contempt. Verse 11, not one of the men who saw my glory and the miraculous signs I performed in Egypt and in the desert, not one of them will ever see the land I promised on oath to their forefathers. No one who has treated me with contempt will ever see it. Verses 22, 23. This was applied to all those who were 20 years of age and older. Verse 29. God fully vindicated Caleb, gave him a glowing testimony. Verse 24. Caleb would be rewarded for his obedience, for his faithfulness, for his wholehearted commitment to God. Joshua would also live to enter the land. Verse 30. He would be at the front of the invasion. He would be their leader. Your children will be shepherds here for 40 years, suffering for your unfaithfulness, until the last of your bodies lies in the desert. For 40 years, 1 year for each of the 40 days you explored the land. Verses 33, 34. As for the 10 spies, their fate was more immediate. Because of their unbelief, because of their bad report, which made the people grumble, they were struck down and died of a plague before the Lord. Verse 37. We know in the scriptures what happened to Joshua. It's well documented. But what about Caleb? During the years that followed, Caleb had to face up to rejection. He had all the right qualifications for leadership. First of all, he came from the tribe of Judah, the ruling tribe, unlike Joshua, who was from the minor tribe of Ephraim. So Caleb could well have expected to succeed Moses. Secondly, Caleb was respected by the people. After all, it was Caleb who silenced the people before Moses, not Joshua. But it was Joshua who was chosen to succeed Moses, not Caleb. Yet it appears there was never a hint of bitterness in Caleb. He seems always to have supported Joshua fully. How do we react when someone gets promoted over our head, perhaps at work, or given a task in the church which we particularly wanted? Do we allow bitterness to eat us up from within, or do we support that person fully, and we look to God for other opportunities. We see that Caleb was commended. God singled him out for special honour among the Israelites. But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. Chapter 14, verse 24. Caleb was commended by God for his right attitude of mind. There was a different spirit about him in the way he reacted to situations and to people. Caleb seems to have been one of those people who always said or did the right thing. And that was probably because his faith and his trust in God was so complete. He always appeared to see things from God's perspective, to have God's vision, to know God's mind. He was also commended for his right attitude of heart. Caleb was totally and utterly committed to God in everything he did. And he still loved and served God, even when things didn't work as he hoped. Caleb would do anything God asked of him with a willing heart and do it to the best of his ability. Could God say the same of us? That we have a different spirit, that we follow him wholeheartedly? Or are there some areas of our life, our attitudes to situations, our attitudes to people, that are lacking in godliness? In fact, probably no different from most of the world. Does our discipleship and our service to God fall short of what it should be? May God help us to show attitude of mind and heart that are pleasing to him. God promised to reward Caleb for his faithfulness and for his exemplary attitude. Not a man of this evil generation shall see the good land I swore to your forefathers, except Caleb. He will see it, and I will give him and his descendants the land he set his feet on, because he followed the Lord wholeheartedly. God always honours and always rewards those who stand for him. How difficult it must have been for Caleb to endure 40 years of frustration in the wilderness with an unbelieving generation before that promise was fulfilled. We sometimes have to wait, and maybe a long time, before we see the fulfillment of what God has promised coming to pass in our personal lives or in the life of our church. Like Caleb, do we maintain an unswerving faith, trust and belief in God throughout that period of waiting? He probably didn't find it any easier any more than we do. But God was with him because Caleb's heart, mind and eyes were fixed upon God. At last the time came to cross the river Jordan, to enter the promised land, and what a thrill that must have been for Caleb after all those years of waiting and anticipation. And as they progressed through the land, Caleb saw his faith in God expressed to the people who for all those years he had been waiting to be vindicated by this one act. Caleb and Joshua were the only two adults to escape from slavery in Egypt and to enter Canaan. And Caleb still kept serving God. He was probably alongside Joshua, whispering words of encouragement, faith and wisdom when they faced setbacks, as at the town of Ai, as we looked at a few Sundays ago. He was probably in the forefront of the celebrations as they experienced victory. Caleb was 85 years old by this time, the time when he entered the promised land, but he was still full of life, still full of faith, still full of fight. When the land had been finally conquered, he came to Joshua to claim the inheritance promised to him by God. This is what he says in Joshua chapter 14, verses 10 to 13. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years, since the time he said this to Moses while Israel moved about in the desert. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I am just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me the hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourself heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he has said. And Joshua blessed Caleb and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. What an amazing speech that is. What a tremendous example of faith and trust in God Caleb must have been to the younger generation around him. Are we who are older such an example to the younger members of the church? Do they look at us and they see a faithful servant of God, whose belief and trust in God is unshakable, unwavering, who is still loving God, as strong today as the first day they knew God? They are still serving God. They are still open to God. They are still keen to do exploits for God. It's so important to have those examples in our churches. And may God help us to be such a living testimony among his people. Caleb was still serving God with as much enthusiasm and vigour as he ever had, even though he was into his 80s. It just goes to show we're never too old to serve the Lord. There is no retirement policy in the kingdom of God. There is still a part for us to play in what God is doing. Believing that God would enable and strengthen him, Caleb was determined to lead his clan in driving the giants, the Anakites, out of the land God had given him. It didn't matter he was 85 years old or not. And drive them out he did. From Hebron, Caleb drove out 3 Anakites, descendants of Anak, for there he marched against the people living in Debir. We end tonight by thinking of a crying need. Today, more than ever, there is a crying need for more people to be like Caleb, particularly in our churches. People with vision, people with a different spirit, people with godly attitudes, people with courage and boldness, people who are walking by faith, who are following God wholeheartedly, who are prepared to fight. Imagine a church full of such people and what God could accomplish through them. And we can be among those people. It's true, the title I started this off with, what that commentator said, it's true we can't all be Joshua's, but we can all be Caleb's. Amen.